All right, my name is Martha Coons, and I'm going to do a presentation on the hanging of Susanna Cox. And I will warn you up front that, these are trigger warnings we have to give now. The story I'm going to tell is upsetting, unpleasant. Some of the details are quite gory. It involves murder, sexual assault, infanticide. We'll look at issues of crime and punishment, hanging, capital punishment. The story looks at issues of reproductive rights. So if any of those things are not something you want to hear, it's okay to get up and enjoy some of the happy things in the festival, because this is not a happy story. As I said, my name's Martha Coons. I am a Kutztown native, at least fourth generation. I grew up coming to this festival. The festival's just a couple years older than me. And one of the traditions we had here at the festival was telling tales. And back in the early days of the festival, I'm told that after all the guests and out-of-towners left, then the locals gathered around a campfire and told tales. And one of the tales that was told every year was about the hanging of Susanna Cox. And eventually, the story became so popular in its telling that in 1965, they decided to do a historic reenactment of the hanging. And so I know some of you in the crowd have seen it. For some of you, this is news. We had a historically accurate gallows built. It had 13 steps, it had a trap door, it had a noose, we had a hangman, we had an effigy of Susanna Cox in a replica of the dress that she wore on the day she died. And I went up the gallows steps and told the story that I will tell you today. And at the conclusion of the story, the hangman pulled the rope, the trapdoor fell, and Susanna was hung in effigy, and her body swung there on the end of the noose. Last year was the last year we actually did it. We did it 2 days, and then I got a call from the festival director saying they had comments on social media that the reenactment of the hanging was upsetting. And I initially thought that was a compliment, that I had done my job, because it should be upsetting. But in fact, it was deemed so upsetting that we were no longer going to do the reenactment. So last year, I could still go up on top of the gallows and tell the story, but there was no Susanna, the coffin was gone, and no noose, no hangman, just me telling the story. This has raised a lot of discussion. I don't think you'll find a local here who thinks we shouldn't still be doing it, but by the same token, people coming to this festival for the first time thought maybe it was distasteful and not appropriate to do. But to give you a perspective of the whole arc of this, we started as a storytelling thing after hours. By 1965, we had the gallows up here in the midway, front and center. We hung Susanna 2 times a day. And after she was hung, her body was put in a coffin and loaded onto a horse-drawn hearse that Paulie Brumbaugh rode around the festival grounds. That's how big a deal it was here. The 1989 program for the festival gives a 4-page spread devoted to this ritual that we did here every year. So that's some of the history of the story, but you know, I was faced with the option of, well, maybe we just won't do it at all, or I could tell you the story here on the seminar stage, and we would at least continue to tell Susanna's story, which, as I was thinking about it, the concept occurred to me of historic recurrence. Historic recurrence, and this basically is, and it's been said many different ways, but if we don't remember our history, we are doomed to repeat it. And so with that in mind, I looked at the issues that were present in 1809 with Susanna.
I'm with him.
They involved issues of poverty, class, literacy, education, access to justice, equal justice, and issues of forensic science. So, knowing that we are still very much learning from these events that occurred in 1809, I made the decision to come here and tell the story. Now, some of you, as a side note, may remember my immediate predecessor, and I think I'm at least the fourth or fifth person over 70 years here to narrate the story. June DeTurk did it for many, many years before me. And June is still alive. She's 99. She was here on Sunday and did a reading of the 23rd Psalm in German. And June is very much still with us. Now, I got to do this. I inherited the job from June because she was a lifelong friend of my mother's, and I used to say, June, if you ever get tired of doing the hanging, I'd be happy to help out. And her immediate response was, no, as long as I can walk up those gallows steps, then I will do it. And she did, well into her 90s. And June used to, eventually she said I could be her understudy. So June and I would both suit up in our black dresses and bonnets and go down to the gallows, and then sometimes she'd say, now Martha, they say at my age I shouldn't be out in this heat. Would you mind doing the hanging today? And I'd say, okay. And the first year we had that arrangement, I did it maybe 3 times. And we were doing it 3 times a day then, even last year. But eventually, I did, I think, 25 out of 27 hangings, and now I've got it in its new hybrid version. So what I'm going to read for you is about a 10-minute reading that we used to do from atop the gallows. The script is largely unchanged since it was written in probably the early 60s. A lot of it takes language from the broadsides or broadside ballads, which there's my visual aid over there. Thank you, Bill. Broadsides, if you're not familiar with them, it was a 1-page sheet of printed paper that told a story, something newsworthy. And if it was really newsworthy, people wrote ballads about it. So these appear in verse. So the tragic tale of Susanna Cox has more than its fair share of broadsides written, and people are still writing ballads today. 2 days ago, I had a gentleman come up at the end of the presentation and share a song that he had written just 2 years ago that told the tale of Susanna Cox. So her story is still very much alive, and here we go. All ye who feel for others' woes, with hearts compassionate, oh, listen to the woeful tale of a poor damsel's fate. Susanna Cox, a country maid, young and of a beauty rare, in only as a servant had long lived with Jacob Gare. Ne'er had she been instructed in the course of human law, nor did she know God's holy word, which strike the world with awe. For everyone must be aware of what he daily sees, that whom the scriptures don't restrain, they'll do just as they please. With this grim warning in mind, let us look back to the events leading to the death of Susanna Cox. Although they took place over 200 years ago in 1809, these events have a strange parallel in the world today. Susanna was born in 1785, and little is known about her family, except that it was large and there was little money. At the age of 13, Susanna was bound out to the Snyder family to work for board and lodging as an indentured servant, with the understanding that she'd continue to work there until someone came to marry her. But no one came for Susanna. The Snyders lived on a large farm in the Ole Valley, which is about 14 miles south of here. Susanna never left the Ole Valley. She never learned to read or write. She couldn't even sign her own name, and she got very little religious instruction. Now, on a neighboring farm lived the Mertz family. Mr. Mertz, already the father of 2 children, took notice of Susanna and began visiting her secretly at night. When Susanna became pregnant, she hid it. She hid it from everyone for fear that she would be put out of the Snyder household, where she had been quite happy for 11 years. Then on Friday, February 17th, 1809, Jacob Gare, a son-in-law of the Snyders, went into the cold cellar. There he found the frozen body of a male baby wrapped in an old coat. When questioned, Susanna admitted that the baby was hers. She said it had been born dead, though, 3 days earlier, and she'd been so scared she didn't know what to do, so she hid it. A hastily convened inquest, however, revealed that the child had a broken jaw. His tongue had been torn loose, and a wad of flax had been stuffed into his throat. Susanna was arrested. She pleaded not guilty and was placed in the old jail at 5th and Washington Streets in Reading, the county seat, there to await trial. Now, previously, 2 women were hanged in Berks County for killing their children. Both of them were convicted on the basis of an old law brought from England that stated a woman could be hanged for concealing the birth and death of a child. She did not have to be responsible for the death. Concealing it was sufficient for the hanging sentence. The liberal thinkers of the day tried to get the law changed, and they succeeded in 1794 when it finally became necessary to prove that the mother caused the death. In 1804, a woman had been tried for killing her child, and she was acquitted. But now came another one, Susanna Cox. The state authorities were perturbed and were afraid that Susanna would be acquitted, and so they sent the state deputy attorney general, Samuel D. Franks, to head the prosecution. At this time, there was an aversion to strict sentencing laws, so large sums of money were raised for Susanna's defense. The 3 ablest attorneys in the area were secured for her: Marks John Biddle, Charles Evans, and Frederick Smith. And some say it was actually all the interest in the legal battle that created all the interest in Susanna. The case was tried on Friday, April 7th, 1809, before Judge John Spade. The trial lasted 1 day. The jury deliberated for only 4 hours, and the verdict? Guilty. On Saturday, she was sentenced. Judge Spade had no choice. She had to be hanged. But having to pronounce this sentence was so upsetting to him that he resigned his bench within the month. While waiting to be hanged, Susanna was again confined to the old jail, where she spent the days as the maid to the family of Sheriff Marks, even taking her meals with his family. Again, forces rallied and attempted to save Susanna. This time a group pleaded with Governor Simon Snyder to commute her sentence. And it seemed as though they were succeeding when a Lancaster County woman was arrested for killing her child. Governor Snyder ordered Susanna to be hanged on Saturday, June 10th, between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. The Reverend Philip Reinhold Pauley, pastor of the Reformed Church of Reading, had been giving Susanna religious training since she was confined to the jail. When the commutation was denied, it said that Susanna confessed her guilt to Reverend Pauley, perhaps only to save her mortal soul. Now, never in her whole life did Susanna have a new dress, so the women of Reading, who were visiting her frequently, made her a white dress with black bows. The first day she wore a new dress was her last day alive. The procession from the old jail at 5th and Washington Street to Penn Street, then up Penn to City Park, where Gallows Hill was located, was a regular parade. It included, in order, a troop of infantry, a fife and drum corps playing the funeral march, a horse-drawn wagon with a coffin on it, Susanna leaning on the arm of Reverend Pauley, the sheriff's party, and a crowd of onlookers estimated to be 20,000 in number. The hangman, whose identity was never revealed, arrived masked. As was tradition, he was paid on the spot in silver dollars. When he was finished, he got as far as 6th and Penn, where he was caught by the crowd and beaten. He was able to escape and ran to the foot of Penn Street, where he just managed to get on the ferry as it was leaving to cross the Schuylkill River. Then, after a prayer by Reverend Pauley, a hymn which Susanna had memorized was sung. Ich armer Mensch, ich armer Sünder, steh her vor deinem Angesicht. Ach Gott, verfahr gelinder, und geh nicht mit mir ins Gerecht. Erbarme dich, erbarme dich. Gott, mein Erbarmer, über mich. I, wretched sinner, creature poor, stand here before thy sight. O God, show mercy in this hour. Judge not with vengeful might. Take pity, Lord, thou pitying God, upon my desperate plight. And then the deed was done. She was the last woman to be publicly executed in Pennsylvania. After her death, there were many poems written about Susanna. This is part of one of them. Just as the clock did strike 11, she straightway from the jail was led to where the gallows stood. A lamentable tale, so piteous her crying was, so great her anguish and her fears, that every heart was moved and every eye shed tears. She then was made to undergo the punishment of death. Scarce 17 minutes had expired when she resigned her breath. Short was and sad her pilgrimage, her youth mere drudgery, her age but 20 years and 4, her exit infamy. And that's the story as we have been telling it and reading it and until this year reenacting it at the festival. So I'll take any questions or comments anyone has. Yes, sir.
What happened to the father of the baby?
That's always the first question. What happened to the father of the baby, Mr. Mertz? That would be nothing. Nothing happened to him, and I'll tell you though, you may have noticed in the story, there seemed to be a spate of unwed mothers being charged with infanticide. Fathers were not accountable, but not long after this, they started to hunt down fathers and make them in some way accountable, but in Susanna's case, no luck. Yes? Oh my goodness, that's his comment was oh my goodness. His wife was related to Susanna Cox. Through the Mertzes? Oh my goodness. Yeah. Any other questions, comments? Yes?
Where is she buried?
We don't know. Yeah, we don't know where the baby is, and we don't know where Susanna is. There's speculation that she's in somewhere in downtown Reading, near where the Berkshire Hotel was. But there's also the story that two of her siblings, the Katzenmoyers, I believe, claimed her body and buried it at a secret location, probably in the Ole Valley. Next question, yeah?
What would have happened to a woman at that time if she had the baby?
That's a very good question. What would have happened to Susanna had the baby lived? Again, we don't know. I think her fear was probably accurate. She would have been turned out of the Snyder's farm. Because as an indentured servant, you're really just there to work, not to raise your own family, and bring an illegitimate baby into the world. So we kind of think that was, she didn't have options. Again, this is,
Either way, she's,
yeah. This raises issues of reproduction and rights and laws. So I think we're still working on a lot of those issues currently. Question?
Thank you. I didn't quite understand Maria after she was born. Did she expire right away?
That's a good question. Yeah, if you're familiar with the story, there's a line in there about scarce 17 minutes had expired. Yeah, she, the gallows that we used here was not the gallows that was used for Susanna. Her gallows was actually something more like when you play the game Hangman as a kid, one stick up, one over, you draw a little noose, okay? That's kind of what they had in mind for Susanna. And she was to stand on the back of the wagon, and then the horses would pull away, and she would drop, and the noose would tighten. Now, the first problem they had was Susanna was very short. So when the hangman tied the noose, and Susanna stood on the wagon, the noose was up here. So to solve the problem, rather than lengthen the noose, they had her stand on her coffin on the wagon. And then the horse took off. So I don't know how exact the science was of hanging at that time, but ideally, if you can have an ideal, when your body drops, your neck should break from the force of the fall, and you're basically knocked out and your neck is broken. In Susanna's case, that didn't happen. She asphyxiated. She was just basically choked to death, and it took 17 minutes. And at the end of 17 minutes, it said that someone from the crowd, either the doctor who was there or someone else, gave her a tug to make sure it was finished. Then also, as the custom was at that time, just like with butchering animals, to make sure she was dead, she would be bled. And that was all part of a public spectacle. Yes? I'm not aware of any pictures. Right. I'm not aware of any pictures. Okay. I have time for one or two more questions. I can tell you this. The state of forensic science, this is something interesting. Sadly, in 1809, we were still only looking at the outside of a body to determine the cause of death. But not long after this, maybe in the mid-1800s, we began doing autopsies that involved looking inside the body. And so in the case of a baby that was born alive, it would have taken a breath, and you could see that upon examination of the lungs. If, as Susanna claimed, the baby was stillborn, that would have been obvious too. But in 1809, we did not look inside the corpse to make that determination. All right, thank you. Those were good questions. Thank you for coming.